How are you?
Hi, I'm Rebecca.
Oh, hi, Rebecca. How are you? Nice to
Good,
meet
I'm
you.
sorry,
Okay.
I'm so on emails. I've been
That's okay.
wildly busy the last couple of weeks, but I have.
I'll give him another.
Yeah, we're campaigning and it's going really well. We have like a staff on the street, so all we can do to just.
Sure, sure.
I appreciate you being forbearing with.
That's all.
The same. Join you over here, stranger. How are you? Hey there, how are you? Good to see you officially in person. They're here all all 3, 4 months over. Which is really great.
No, that was fun.
It could be fun.
It was in print somewhere. I didn't hear it.
You're back.
The committee was still in advance as we get something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh. Oh. There was controversy around him that I should change. Okay, back then. So that
Thank you. I've never.
Everything in the last 20 years. I know.
Oh, yeah, I do. I mean.
No,
You can realize that there's a little bit of a puzzle.
One day.
Is there a reason we can't start?
Yes.
Good afternoon. The Commission on Chicago Landmarks Program Committee is now called to order. My name is the Reverend Dr. Richard Tolliver. I am a member of the commission and served as chair of the program committee. I will be presiding over the meeting today. My fellow commissioner, Ms. Sue Ellen Burns, also serves on the program committee. Commissioner Burns, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Nice to see many of you who are back, and thank you for coming to folks who haven't been here yet. We're always glad to have civic engagement in what we do.
The program committee is a standing committee of the commission on Chicago landmarks. Its main purposes are to hear about Chicago nominations for National Register of Historic Places and public suggestions for new Chicago landmark designation. The committee will first review 4 nominations for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. After this, we will review 7 suggestions submitted for Chicago landmark designation. I'd like to give some background about the commission's review of National Register nominations. The National Register is a federal program that recognizes historically and architecturally significant properties. The commission gets a chance to review and comment on National Register nominations for Chicago properties because Chicago is a certified local government under the National Historic Preservation Act. The program committee will make recommendations to the full commission on Chicago landmarks, and any commission votes recommending nominations will be forwarded to the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council. Today, we will be considering 4 National Register nominations. I will call the name of the person making the presentation. After they are done, I will ask if any members of the general public would like to speak. If property owners are present, please use this opportunity to say a few words should you so desire. The first nomination is for 2678 Washington Boulevard. The nomination was prepared by John Kramer and Emily Ramsey of Ramsey Historic Consultants, Inc. Who will be presenting it?
That would be me, Emily Ramsey.
Okay, you may begin.
Do I just tell you to move the slide or?
Why don't I do it just because we have to do the share part of it?
Okay. Hello, my name is Emily Ramsey and I'm with Ramsey Historic Consultants. And we have 3 nominations today. And this is the first one for 2678 West Washington Boulevard in Chicago. Next slide. I think many of us or some of us might be familiar with this property since the Chicago Landmark staff prepared the building's landmark designation report last year, and the building received its landmark designation in January of this year. And we'd like to thank the staff at Landmarks who all had a hand in creating the landmark designation. It certainly helped us and served as an important base of information for this nomination. Next slide. The site is located in Chicago's East Garfield Park neighborhood, and it's composed of 2 contributing buildings, a main house completed circa 1880 and a dormitory building completed in 1923, designed by Hollibert and Roche. The side coach house has been substantially altered and is non-contributing. Next slide. 2678 West Washington is locally significant under National Register Criterion A for social history for the property's associations with 2 significant local charitable institutions, the Chicago Home for Convalescent Women and Children and the Florence Crittenden Anchorage that successively occupied the site and for 5 decades provided on-site shelter, healthcare, and other services for Chicago women and children in need. Next slide. It's really tough to summarize the complex history of this building, but we're gonna try in 5 minutes. The main house was completed as a private home circa 1880 and had 2 owners. In 1923, the last family to own the building donated the main house to the Chicago Home for Convalescent Women and Children. Next slide. Which was a local benevolent organization founded in 1904 with the mission of providing post-hospital care to poor women and children. Poor patients were often discharged from local hospitals before they were fully recovered, and the Chicago Home provided them low-cost and sometimes free care until they could return home. The CHCWC began in this three-story home at 521 West Adams Street on the west side before moving in 1923 to the main house on Washington Boulevard. Next slide. When CHCWC moved in 1923, they also commissioned Chicago architects Holabird and Roach to design a new dormitory at the rear of the site, which housed 2 children's wards and additional beds for adult female residents. Next slide. Like many nonprofit healthcare organizations in the city, the CHCWC struggled from the effects of the Great Depression and World War II, and the organization closed its doors in 1946. At its closing, the Chicago Tribune called the Chicago Home a landmark among the city's charitable institutions, and by then the CHCWC had sheltered and treated more than 15,000 women and children over its 45 years of operation. Next slide. After remaining vacant for 3 years, another nonprofit healthcare provider moved into the property. Florence Crittenden Anchorage was founded in Chicago in 1886 to house 4 unwed mothers during their pregnancies, but also with the mission to prepare these women to lead more productive lives once they left the facility. Next slide. The Florence Crittenden Anchorage was actually the result of a merging of the National Florence Crittenden Mission based on the East Coast and the Anchorage, which was founded in Chicago. The resulting Florence Crittenden Anchorage operated a series of maternity homes or refuge homes for 4 expectant mothers and was one of the best known and longest lived organizations of its kind in Chicago. Notably, throughout its history, Chicago's Anchorage was open to housing women of all ethnicities, religions, and racial groups, which was an especially progressive stance in mid-20th century Chicago. Next slide. The Florence Crittenden Anchorage evolved as an organization during its time in East Garfield Park. Its clientele changed from predominantly white women, often professionals, who were looking for a discreet location to await their deliveries, to predominantly young Black girls. As the world outside the Anchorage changed, its approaches to contraception and abortion and to unwed mothers in general, numbers at the Anchorage dwindled and the organization closed its doors on Washington Boulevard in 1973. The site continued to serve as a home for nonprofit organizations until 2015. And the building is currently vacant, but plans are being made to convert the site to a community space. Next slide. So now a quick tour of the site. So this is an overview showing the main house at the bottom, the dormitory at the top left, and then the coach house on the right. Next slide. This is the the primary facing elevation of the main house, the south elevation looking north. Next slide. The east elevation, which houses the main entrance and entrance porch. Next slide. Some more details of the entrances on the east elevation. Next slide. The west elevation. Next slide. This is the north elevation, which faces into a courtyard that's formed by the different buildings. Next slide. Both the main house is very intact, both on the exterior and the interior. So this is a detail of the entrance hall where you see the original staircase, the original paneling and finishes. Next slide. The main living room space retains its window surrounds with the curved bay and historic flooring and detailing in the historic tile in the fireplace. Another detail of the first floor turret room. Next slide. The upper floor, the second floor stair hall. Next slide. A rear stair, which leads to what was originally the servants' quarters. Next slide. Typical room on the second floor. Next slide. I like this shot because it shows on the bathroom tile. It's a really amazing remnant from the time when the building was a single family home. Next slide. This is the third floor, which was originally servants' quarters. Next slide. And another room on the servants' quarters floor. Next slide. This is the dormitory, which was completed in 1923 by Holabird and Roach. This is the east elevation facing into the courtyard. Next slide. The east and the north elevations fronted onto the street. Slide. South and west elevations connecting to the house. Next slide. And then the west elevation. Next slide. The interior of the dormitory is in pretty sad shape. A lot of damage on the interior, but this is the main corridor. Next slide. Secondary corridor. Next slide. And a typical room in the dormitory. Next slide. This is the coach house, was a non-contributing building within the landmark designation and the National Register nomination due to alterations. That's the south elevation. Next slide. And the north and west elevations. That concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions that you.
Commissioner, do you have any questions?
Just a affirmation. Can you remind us if the sculpture is included in this nomination as well?
The sculpture is not because it's outside the period of significance for the
Okay.
National Register nomination, but my understanding is it's in the landmark designation.
Yeah.
As a contributing to the landmark.
Thank you.
Who are the current owners and do they have plans for the building?
Yes, the current owner is a trust but they have had community meetings with owners. It's related to the Baldwin family, the family that owns Walmart. And so they're looking into the community space for the building, something that will bring in members of the community and really kind of tie everything together. So it's a nice sort of continuation of the history of the building and its new life.
And the administrators of the trust are
Thank you.
in favor.
Yes, they commissioned us to do this report.
Can you tell us the specific name of the trust?
I don't have it with me, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Are there any comments from the general public on this? Yes.
Yes, Wood Miller with Preservation Chicago. We very much support this designation. We were alerted to this demolition and we were really happy to work with the city towards a landmark designation of this important site on Chicago's west side. We fully support this effort.
Any other public comments? If not, I'll call for a vote to recommend or not.
So moved?
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The vote that carries. The second nomination is for the James C. Curtis and Company Building at 1214 West Van Buren Street. The nomination was prepared by John Kramer of Ramsey Historic Consultants, Inc. With the presenter.
I'm the
Begin.
presenter for this one. Thank you. So this is the nomination for the James C. Curtis and Company Building at 1220 West Van Buren Street in Chicago. Next slide. The Curtis Building is located at Van Buren and Racine on Chicago's near west side and faces south on Interstate 290 across from UIC. Next slide. The building is locally significant under National Register Criterion C for architecture as a rare extant example of a fireproof industrial loft constructed utilizing steel framing, a transitional structural system only briefly used in the first 2 decades of the 20th century as American industrial facilities evolved from those constructed with wood to reinforced concrete. The building's architects are Patterson and Davidson, and the building's period of significance is the year 1910, the year of the building's completion. Next slide. This is a very visible building. You've probably seen it and not noticed it on your way past on 290. And it's one of the most intact industrial buildings in the near west side. Next slide. By 1910, when the Curtis Building was built, Chicago's near west side was the city's largest inner city manufacturing district, the largest concentration of industrial structures in the city. As the neighborhood experienced a post-World War II industrial slowdown, many of its companies departed. The last half of the 20th century also brought significant changes to the near west side, and it became the target for redevelopments. Next slide. Urban renewal projects, including new public and privately subsidized housing projects and the construction of UIC dramatically changed the neighborhood. And most significantly, the Chicago Circle Interstate projects, which divided the near west side into highly separated quadrants. Next slide. Today, much of the near west side's historic industrial building stock has either been demolished or has been altered through redevelopment, which is what makes the Curtis Building so rare. Next slide. There would have been dozens of buildings like this one during the industrial district's heyday, but today there are only a handful, and the Curtis Building is one of them. Next slide. The Curtis Building was designed by the architectural firm Patterson and Davidson, a brief partnership between two leaders in Chicago industrial architecture and engineering, William R. Patterson and Frankie Davidson. Next slide. Together, they helped pioneer the field of industrial engineering in Chicago, a highly specified field of design that emerged circa 1910 to assist American industry to create more efficient and cost-effective production, distribution, and storage facilities. Next slide. Curtis Building was the first prominent building of their partnership, and they used a rendering of the building in their early advertisements for the firm. Next slide. The building was constructed for casket manufacturer James C. Curtis, who operated his Undertaker's Supply business there. Next slide. The Curtis Company occupied the site until 1946, after which the property was the home of Oxford Clothes, Inc. for 7 decades. Next slide. Oxford Clothes was well known for their men's suits, which were sold at large retailers, including Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, Marshall Field. Oxford occupied the building from 1946 until 2016, and the building is currently empty. Next slide. What is important about the Curtis Building is that it is a good local example of an intact early 20th century industrial loft, defined as a multi-story industrial facility constructed with a frame of either steel or reinforced concrete, or a combination of the two, as in the Curtis Building. They had masonry facades with large glass windows for light and ventilation, and inside open floor plans for maximum flexibility of use. They were now all probably very familiar with this building type. In the early 20th century, this was a new concept in the design of buildings for American industry. And the Curtis Building is unique in that it is a hybrid fireproof industrial loft constructed both with steel and reinforced concrete. Next slide. A few slides about the evolution of building technology of fireproof industrial lofts, which began as fire resistant, not fireproof, timber frame lofts, which were ultimately replaced. Next slide. And next slide, by reinforced concrete construction, which was fireproof and could handle much heavier loads of equipment and products and the repetitive loads of machines in operation. And the Curtis Building is a unique example of a transitional type of fireproof industrial loft with steel columns and beams and reinforced concrete floor slabs and joist. Next slide. So here you can see the steel columns are clad in clay tile. And then the floors and the ceilings are concrete. Next slide. There are some other examples of hybrid industrial lofts in the near west side's former industrial sector. And here you can see a couple of examples. But due to demolition in this neighborhood, this type of building is increasingly rare. And the Curtis Building is a good example. Next slide. A quick tour of the building. So this is an overview. You can see the building location. Next slide. This is the south elevation facing Van Buren, the primary elevation, and the east elevation. Next slide. Closer view, you can see the building. Next slide. This is the east elevation, which retains a lot of the original windows. Next slide. The rear elevation facing the alley, facing north. Next slide. This is the main entrance into the building, which takes you into the entrance lobby. Next slide. The Van Buren Street entrance lobby is a very nice, small but nice and intact entrance lobby with marble wainscoting, tile flooring, and this kind of unique interior vestibule. Next slide. A couple more photos. Next slide. The open archway to the enclosed center elevator with the stair winding around. Next slide. On the second floor is the remnants of a former showroom from the casket company, which is really no longer really visible, but next slide, you can see the raised platform where which originally housed offices, and there are some remnants of original detailing there. Next slide. But everywhere else in the building is pretty much what you expect in a manufacturing building, with open utilitarian floors with exposed structure and little detailing. Next slide. Next slide. This is the main stair, again, very utilitarian. Next slide. This National Register nomination is being pursued as part of a federal historic tax credit application for the building for a residential reuse, and the owner commissioned RHC to complete both the National Register nomination and the tax credit application. Happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Burns, do you have any questions?
I don't think.
I don't either. Are there any comments from the public?
Sir, I can make a comment, please.
Could you state your name, please?
Hi, my name is Dan Luna, Chief of Staff for Alderman Bill Conway here in the 34th Ward, where this building sits. Alderman asked me to come here on his behalf to show his support for this nomination. We're currently working with the property owner and the community process to get this to become an all residential building. And I'd just like to happily say that our last community meeting with this, a majority of the residents really want to see this building saved, maintained, and then converted, because obviously it looks like it has for many, many years. So please note that Alderman Conway does support this nomination, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes.
Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago, we very also much support this residential conversion from an office building or an industrial building to residential. We would just have one question, and that is, would the ownership and would the commission down the line consider this building as a designated Chicago landmark? Because it seems like it would fit all the qualifications.
That's a question.
That's a question. That's a question to Emily and the ownership.
But you also said the commission.
Oh, yes, I did.
We can't answer for the commission.
No, that's true. That's true. So with the owner, consider a Chicago landmark designation of this
We can
building. It's a
have that.
fine, it's a fine building.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would call for a vote on whether or not to recommend this building for the National Register.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. I vote for it also. The motion is passed. The third National Register item is an amendment for a property already listed on the National Register. Immaculata High School at 600 West Irving Park Road. The amended nomination was prepared by Emily Ramsey of Ramsey Historic Consultants, Inc. Would you make your presentation?
Yes. So yes, this is Immaculata High School at 600 West Irving Park Road in Chicago. The owner of the building, current owner, is pursuing federal historic tax credits to convert the complex to residential apartments. And as part of that process, we're updating the original 1977 nomination. Next slide. Immaculata High School was designed by architect Barry Byrne and completed in 1922 for the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Two large additions, also designed by Byrne, were constructed west and north of the original high school in 1955 and 1956. And the complex was designated a Chicago landmark in 1983, and the designation includes all three structures. Next slide. The site is located in the Buena Park community area, just west of the lake and Lakeshore Drive. The three interconnected buildings form a roughly U-shaped plan, with the 1922 high school building at the southeast corner. The 1955 convent addition is located north of the high school, and the 1956 classroom addition extends to the west along Irving Park Road. Next slide. Immaculata High School was originally listed in the National Register in 1977 for its significance as an early example of Barry Byrne's work. Like many older National Register nominations, the previous listing was extremely brief with not much historic context, and the listing did not include the 1950s additions as contributing structures. This new nomination provides additional information and historic context to justify the expansion of the period of significance in the boundary to include the two 1950s additions. Next slide. Barry Byrne was an influential Chicago architect who studied under Frank Lloyd Wright and later established his own unique personal style of organic modernism, blending influences from the Prairie School, the Chicago School, and European modernism. Byrne, a devout Catholic, was best known for his groundbreaking ecclesiastical commissions for the Roman Catholic Church. Next slide. Byrne received his architectural training in Frank Lloyd Wright's Oak Park studio. Between 1902 and 1908, he prepared working drawings for several of Wright's major projects, including Unity Temple at the top left, the F.F. Tomic House at the top right, and the Avery Coonley House at the bottom. Next slide. Byrne left the studio in 1908 and spent several years in various partnerships with affiliates of the master. While heading Walter Burley Griffin's Chicago practice, Byrne began to diverge from the Prairie School and develop his own style, which focused on exterior massing and wall planes that expressed interior spaces and utilized abstract geometric detailing to create texture and interest. Two examples of his work during this period are the Garden Implements, which are a Chicago landmark, and the chemistry building at the University of New Mexico. Next slide. Byrne is best known for his ecclesiastical designs, most of which were commissioned by the Catholic Church. By the late 1920s, his portfolio included numerous churches, schools, and seminaries, including Immaculata High School, which reflected his architectural philosophy. Next slide. Byrne's design for Church of Christ, the King in Cork, Ireland, represented the pinnacle of his early work. as he pushed for further abstraction and expressive massing and volumes. Next slide. This is a view of the original 1922 Immaculata High School circa 1930. To the left is the original convent house, which was demolished in 1955 when the new convent wing was constructed north of the building. Next slide. These are a couple more historic images showing the original building before construction of the addition. The statue of the Virgin Mary at the main entrance on the left, designed by sculptor Alfonso Ainelli, a frequent collaborator with Byrne, and it was removed when the Catholic Church sold the building. Next slide. We'll do a quick tour of the 1922 building. This is the primary facade facing onto Irving Park Road, looking east. And you can see the main entrance where the statue once stood. Next slide. It's looking across Marine Drive at the east elevation of the building, which also has a primary entrance. Next slide. This is the south and east elevations of the original school, showing where the auditorium, that corner block is where the auditorium and gymnasium are located. Slide. This is a kind of dark view of the rear of the building, which kind of frames what's now used as a parking lot. Next slide. The details of the two main entrances on the 1922 building. The entrance on the left, which enters into a lobby that goes into the auditorium, and then the entrance on the right, which leads to the corridors. Next slide. This is the entrance lobby to the auditorium building. Next slide. And this is the auditorium, which is very intact. The seats have been replaced, but it retains a lot of its original detailing. Next slide. Next slide. The gymnasium on the third floor of the building is also intact. Next slide. And as are the corridors, which have terrazzo flooring and original wood and glass doors. Next slide. The main stairs are still intact, and then some general classroom spaces. Next slide. After World War II, Burns's style evolved to incorporate new materials and more complex massings. Several of his best-known church designs utilized an ellipsoid plan that created modern and dramatic exterior forms and interior spaces. Other designs, including the 1950s additions at Immaculata, feature more angular forms and geometric massings. Next slide. So this is an overview of the convent edition, just to kind of show how Burns designs had evolved. And here you can clearly see all the different uses of the building are clearly expressed on the exterior, with the angled residential wing and the chapel, which projects up above the main block of the building. Next slide. This is some current photos of the additions, the convent addition, the east and north elevations looking southwest. Next slide. This is the connection between the original high school and the convent addition. Next slide. So if you, with the residential wing at right, so you can kind of see all of the push and pull of the exterior forms. Next slide. This is looking towards the rear elevation of the wing, so that your interior parking level. Next slide. Rear entrance onto the building. Next slide. On the interior, it was a convent. So on the interior, very, very simple finishes, not a lot of detailing. This is the residential wing that housed the nuns. Next slide. So ground floor dining room. Next slide. And chapel space, which has been altered by the previous occupants of the building, which was Islamic. Next slide. This is the 1956 classroom addition, the main entrance tower, adjacent to the 1922 building, looking north. Slide. You can see a little bit less dramatic, but still kind of push and pull of forms on this building too. This is the south elevation. Next slide. This is the north elevation facing the parking lot. Next slide. The interior of the classroom addition, the lobby has had finishes and new finishes, but the volume is intact. Next slide. It's the typical corridor in the classroom addition. Next slide. Stair, upper floor corridor at the top right, and then a typical classroom at the bottom right. I think that might be it. Next slide. That's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Burns, do you have any questions?
Forgive me if you already mentioned this and I just missed it. Can you tell us who are the current occupants of this building?
The occupants or the owners? So
Occupants.
currently it's serving as a housing for refugees and that's been for the last year or so.
And who are the owners?
2 years.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Who are the owners?
Giles Development is the owner.
And they're amenable?
They are, yes, they hired us to do it.
Are there any comments from the public?
Yes, go ahead.
No,
sir.
no, go ahead.
No, go ahead first, please.
Hi, I'm Lynette Colias. I'm here to support Senator Simmons and his staff and friends as the city senator. Half my friends went to when it was Immaculata, and then it was sold and it became a religious school. Right? And now it's sheltering our new arrivals. My question is, what are the plans for this area? It's Lakeshore Drive and Urban Park. It's been there forever and ever, and it's beautiful. But what are the plans for the school, the convent, and the area besides becoming historic?
Sure. So the driving force behind this nomination is the owner's intention to redevelop the property for residential apartments. And so it will remain a residential building. And the update to the National Register nomination ensures that not only the main 1922 building, but also that all of the work on the wings will meet the standards, the National Register standards.
That's nice.
Mr. Miller?
Yes, Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago. We absolutely love the Chicago landmark, so this is a great investment in this building. My paternal grandmother attended school here in the 1920s and 1930s, so it's wonderful to see this complex reused as it's sort of been languishing for the last number of years. Just a really quick question to Emily. Is the auditorium and the gymnasium, are those spaces going to remain whole? Will they be community spaces? Or
Yeah.
will they be subdivided? Hopefully it'll be remaining intact.
Yeah, they're not going to be subdivided into units in the current plan. And for the landmark designation report, when the project went through PRC, which was I think several years ago, the landmark designation did not specifically call out interiors, but as part of the PRC review, landmarks has review over work that happens in the auditorium and in the gymnasium, and then also the first floor, the main stair at the first floor, is my understanding.
Would there be any, just following up on that, would there be any interest after the project is done to maybe bring that auditorium space, especially into the landmark designation?
It is
As an
already.
idea?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
written, it's.
Oh, it's
as you were
considered.
saying, it does not specify it, but based on an overview of the entire report that was presented to the commission, those primary more public interior spaces are something that we would review. So those volumes, probably any kind of special treatment of the surfaces, that kind of stuff would be maintained just because of the landmark status.
Thank you, thank you. And then just one last comment that the statue of Mary that's was originally part of the front entrance is at the ENLA Studios in Park Ridge. So if there's ever interest in bringing that back, I want you to know it's just it's in a museum in Park Ridge. It was at the Smart Museum for many years in storage at the University of Chicago, but it's still with us. And I know Edgar Miller had a little hand with ENLA in its fabrication. So really interesting stuff. Thank you.
I'll just say for the benefit of the public who's not familiar with the term Ms. Ramsey used, PRC, it stands for the Permit Review Committee, which is one of two committees of the commission.
Clarification. There are no further public comments. I will call for a vote on whether to recommend the amended National Register nomination for Immaculata High School to the full commission.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. The fourth National Register item is a nomination for the Edgewater Glen Historic District, roughly bounded by Hood Avenue on the north, Norwood Street on the south, Broadway on the east, and Clark Street on the west. The nomination was prepared by Jean Gorino
Yes.
of Gorino Historic Resources Documentation. Jean Gorino will make the presentation.
Okay. Well, we can just let's see the picture over here. Grab it back for sure. Good afternoon, and I'm delighted to be here to present the nomination for the Edgewater Glen District on behalf of the Edgewater Glen Association. The homeowners who were the catalyst for this nomination were very proud of their neighborhood. The period of the district is eligible for National Register under criterion C for architecture. It is a scroll. You can use the arrows. Okay. It is a distinctive suburban style district of early 20th century houses within the larger lakeshore northside community of Edgewater. The period of significance is 1890, when the first subdivision occurred, to 1928, when the district attained residential maturity. So again, the district is comprised of 411 contributing buildings, and the vast majority of which are residential, with 62 contributing garages, only 11 non-contributing buildings. And the district estate is bounded from east to west by Broadway and Clark Street, and from north to south by Hood Avenue and Norwood Street. And the boundaries were determined by, these are all blocks that have a majority of single family houses. It's a single family district. There's the north side of Hood Avenue was left off because that has a majority of multifamily buildings. And this is a district that was subdivided within a period of just about 10 years in the 1880s and early 1900s. And the earliest subdivisions were on the east half of the district. Up until the early 1900s, the west half of the district was part of a large farm that was owned by the Krantz family, who were early settlers in the area. And they did not subdivide their farm until 1903 and 1904. So, let's see here. And when the Krantz family did subdivide their farm, the family members, the sons of the original owners, became subdividers and developers. So they actually developed their own land. And what's really distinctive about this district is that nearly all of the buildings in the district were built within a 15-year time period between 1900 and 1915. And it's just this comparison of the 1,500 blocks of Hood, Glen Lake, and Norwood between 1905 on the left and 1928 on the right just shows that, you know, there was no development at all on those blocks in Glen Lake and Norwood in 1905, but these blocks were fully developed by 1928. And so of the 349 residential buildings, there are 291 detached single-family houses, 58 multifamily buildings, most of which are two flats. In fact, I think there 40 of the 58 multifamily are two flats. And so what is really distinctive about this neighborhood is that it's really kind of this unique suburban style island within, again, the larger community area of Edgewater, which is a sprawling, densely built community area of mainly multifamily buildings. The only, some representative streetscapes, the only other neighborhood within the larger community of Edgewater that's comparable to Edgewater Glen is the Lakewood Balmoral District, which was designated on the National Register in 1997. But Edgewater Glen is unique because it's the vast majority, nearly all of its houses represent two styles, Prairie and Queen Anne. And there's just this great cohesiveness in the district. There's The lots are kind of suburban style. They're wider than typical city of Chicago lots, 33 feet wide versus, 25 feet wide. On tree-lined streets with grassy parkways. And there's just this great uniformity in terms of the streetscapes. In terms of the scale, most of the houses are 2 to 2.5 stories in height. In terms of the setbacks, nearly all have, the same setbacks. All of these houses were built with clad in traditional materials, typically brick, stucco, wood, and some gray stone. One of the defining features of the district are these full facade porches. Almost all houses in the district have full facade porches that are either enclosed or open. So that's also kind of notable. And again, out of 291 houses, 264 comprise vernacular versions of either the Prairie style or the Queen Anne style. And the main distinguishing feature between these houses are the steeply pitched gabled roof signifies the Queen Anne style houses. But really, beneath the roof line, even the Queen Anne and Prairie style houses are very similar in appearance with those full facade porches and projecting bays. And so I kind of noted just, there are different kind of subtypes of both the Queen Anne and Prairie style. There's numerous examples of the front gabled versions with both open and closed porches. You can see just kind of the similarities between all these houses. Some of the open porches have classical style detailing, classical columns. Some of the front gables have pediments. It's very common to see these projecting 3-sided window bays. Also, in terms of the Queen Anne, there are examples with side gabled roofs, cross gabled roofs, all with open porches, or either full width or entry porches. Again, some with classical detailing. And most of the Queen Anne style houses were originally clad in wood clapboard. A number of these have been reclad with vinyl, but despite that, it doesn't detract from the original design and window patterns. And also there's some examples of Queen Anne with hipped roofs, and these are all interesting because a lot of these have polygonal corner towers and turrets, so just to give some additional visual interest.
Are you near the end?
Oh, just about. We're just wrapping up here. So then there's examples of the Prairie style, most of which are clad in stucco. So here's some different variations: front entrance, front entry, closed porches, some have side entries. And then there's some other examples in the district. I apologize for that slide on the right. There's a few craftsmen, Chicago bungalows, Dutch colonial. And here's just some examples of the multifamily buildings in the district, most of which are 2 flats. Examples of some contributing garages. And just a few examples of non-contributing buildings, most of which were just built outside the period of significance. And so in conclusion, this is an excellent candidate for a National Register listing under criterion C for architecture. The district has sufficient integrity for listing as well.
Thank you. For the record, I'd like to note that we have received a letter of support for the nomination from Alderwoman Lenny Mana Hoppenworth of the 48th Ward. Commissioner Burns, do you have any questions?
I don't.
I don't have any. Are there any comments from the public? Yes.
Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago, a wonderful candidate once again. So glad to see this coming as a nomination, and also surprised that it's already not a National Register district. So thank you, Gene.
Any other additional public comments? If not, I would call for a vote on whether to recommend listing the Edgewater Glen Historic District on the National Register to the full commission.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. The committee's recommendation for these nominations will be considered by the full commission at its regular monthly meeting on October 3rd. The commission meeting will be held in person here at City Hall in the City Council chambers on the second floor and will begin at 12:45 p.m. Details will be posted on chicago.gov/CCL. The commission's recommendations will afterwards be sent to the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council, which reviews National Register nomination for the entire state. The program committee will now hear suggestions received by staff for new landmark designations since May 2024. I will announce each suggestion and call on the person who submitted it to identify themselves and the organization they represent, if any, and then make a brief statement regarding the suggestion. Please be aware that no decisions concerning the landmark designation will be made at today's meeting. I recognize the presence of State Senator Mike Simmons. I'm not sure which project you're here to support, but after the designated speaker speaks, feel free to speak up.
Absolutely. Thanks, Father.
Thank you. The first one is the former Central YMCA Association building at 19 South LaSalle Street. The suggester is Ward Miller from Preservation Chicago.
Thank you, Commissioner, Mr. Chairman. Ward Miller, Richard H. Treehouse, Executive Director of Preservation Chicago. This is a wonderful building by William LeBaron Jenny and Mundy. It's on LaSalle Street. It's part of three buildings. You see three of them on the right by the father of the skyscraper. He built the first steel frame building just a block away, which was demolished for the Field Building, which is a designated Chicago landmark. The building on the far right, which you're just seeing a corner of there on the far right, upper right, is the New York Life Building, which is also a designated landmark, which we helped to bring to the commission, and we're grateful to the city and the commission to honor and designate that. It's now the Hotel Gray on LaSalle Street, a very successful building. The middle building was also by Jenny, but was remodeled with a Halliburton root facade. It has many Jenny details, and it's also now converted to residential. But 19 South LaSalle is the former Central YMCA headquarters. It's an amazing structure that was originally about 12 stories. It was added on to be 16 stories. It's been in a number of media stories for problems with ownership and foreclosure. In the last couple of weeks, there's been a sidewalk canopy that's been added to the LaSalle Street side, as well as running down Arcade Place. That's sort of gangway sideway alley, which leads to its now entrance. And it's a really remarkable building with a remarkable history. It's noted in many publications. When it was first built, it's noted in current publications that talk about Chicago's architecture. And we're concerned about this building and its fate. It is orange rated, so there is always the possibility for it to be seen before the commission if there were ever a demolition permit. But it is a highly valuable site on LaSalle Street. It's part of this group of Jenny buildings. It's surrounded literally by landmark buildings, the Lumber Exchange or Roanoke building, and continuing northward. And then, of course, going southward, you have the Board of Trade and other structures like the Rookery that are landmarked. We'd like to see this building considered for landmark designation to protect it. Thank you, Dan, for forwarding the slide. And you can see the beautiful detailing here. There's also quite a few details on the interior upper floors. The lobby that's entered a little further down Arcade was remodeled, but a remarkable building that really exemplifies what LaSalle Street was like in 1893 when this was built during the Chicago World's Fair, and an early example of a steel frame building and on a narrow site. And as you can see, you've got these four arches wrapping the corner, and then it becomes a little more utilitarian as it continues to move eastward. But a building that deserves landmark designation, and we are concerned about its ownership and its condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2 is Frederick C. Beeson House, 5830 West Midway Park, Adrian Navarre is the suggestion.
Yeah, Commissioners, we actually have a few items today that we're gonna read and present and officially receive, but unfortunately they weren't able to be here. So this is one of them. We'll read it and then, they may be able to come back at a future program committee meeting and actually make their presentations.
All right,
They put a lot of effort into it, but they just couldn't make it.
okay.
That was clear. I don't wanna steal their thunder. It's their
Got
suggestion,
you.
so.
The third one is a house in Austin. That's what's printed here. 533 North Pine Avenue. Lynette Kelly Bell prepared it, but she indicated she would not be here.
Correct.
Okay, the fourth one is Long Beach Apartment Hotel, 1226 West Loyola Avenue. Kristen Abhalter is the suggestion.
I'm just gonna move over here so I can forward a slide. It's possible.
Just tell me.
Oh, I'll just tell you, okay, no problem. Go ahead. So my name is Kristen Abhalter Smith, and I'm the founding director of Roman Susan, an artist-run nonprofit organization that provides resources and paid opportunities for artists to share their work in the Rogers Park neighborhood of Chicago. The reason I am here and the reason why I'm honored to represent my neighbors and fellow women-led businesses is because of this nearly century-old building. I strongly believe that our combined communities of thousands of supporters wouldn't exist without the location, shape, and design of this distinctive piece of architecture. Next slide, please. It is extremely urgent that this building be recognized by the Chicago Historic Resources Survey. When it was opened as the Long Beach Apartment Hotel in 1926, this building contained 30 apartments and several amenities, including a restaurant, a dry cleaner, and a beauty salon. Its history as a hub of life and activity continues to this day, and as has been reported by WBEZ, the Chicago Reader, and the Loyola Phoenix, the building is in grave danger of demolition. I believe that it meets at least 3 criteria for landmark status in the city of Chicago, and with your help, we can preserve the legacy of this important space. Next slide. The architect of this building, Richard Bernard Curzon, is a Chicago native, and he's the same significant architect of record of the Riviera Motor Sales Company building, which was built in 1925 and was designated a landmark by the city of Chicago in 2012. 1234 West Loyola was built 1 mile north, providing fully furnished and affordable SRO or single room occupancy apartments for workers and migrants to the city. Notable features of this distinctive Flatiron building include terracotta tiles and ornamentation that was hand carved out of Indiana gray limestone. Next slide, please. The woman in this picture, Ramona Rouse, standing next to the limestone detail, had the street named after her in 2020 as Honorary Ramona Rouse Way. She offered me her friendship as a neighbor and anchor tenant of Salon Pastiche, which she operated in the storefront for 23 years. Next slide. Here she raised a wonderful family that includes Illinois State Senator Mike Simmons of the 7th District, who is making history with his advocacy of small businesses, anti-racist policy, LGBTQIA+ rights, immigrant rights, and affordable housing. I have had the pleasure of getting to know Mike since the untimely passing of Ramona Rouse. Her commitment to her clients and her artistry inspired so many, and this quiet building near public transit provided a haven for Ramona to raise a family and run a business. Before I turn this presentation over to Senator Simmons for his comments, I would like to conclude by sharing a brief cultural history of the most recent 12 years. Next slide. The unique shape and location of this building has helped the artists of Roman Susan build an irreplaceable community of arts and culture. Archie's Cafe became a destination for new generations of jazz musicians to continue the musical tradition. And Roman Susan, in collaboration with Experimental Sound Studio, has hosted Chicago jazz great Ben Lamar Gay, among other prominent musicians, performers, and visual artists. Next slide. The Department of Cultural Affairs of the City of Chicago and the Illinois Arts Council has financially supported Roman Susan to make exhibitions free and open to the public. In our tiny, bright beacon of space, we have had the privilege of hosting artists who are receiving international attention, such as Martine Whitehead, Yvette Majorca, and Chiffon Thomas. As their careers rise, they will one day be able to look back at this incredibly distinctive location and remember the inspiration and support that was provided here. Next slide. I attribute much of the success of Roman Susan to the curiosity inspired by people who wander down this quiet street and find this remarkable wedge-shaped building. I hold in my hand, right here, an open letter that was signed by 1,500 people sharing their reasons to love and care for this space. It is important to me and to them that this committee decide quickly to landmark 1234 West Loyola Avenue and the social cultural activities of our great community in the Rogers Park neighborhood would not have been possible without this distinctive historic location.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman and committee members. I am State Senator Mike Simmons, and I represent the 7th District in the far north side of Chicago. The photo that you just saw was of my mother, who was a business owner in this space. I wanted to say that I think that I wanted to say that I'm strongly supportive of landmarking this building, not just because of the quarter century that my mother operated the salon on this quiet block, as a single mother of 2 children, and as one of the very first Black business owners in this area. But also because of the cultural history of Rogers Park. This building has been a place where generations of Rogers Parkers could be able to start up businesses just like my mother did, just like Kristen has done, and just like Roberta has done with the Archie's Cafe space. When this building was designed, just to be able to anticipate that these could be accessible storefronts for business owners that don't come from wealth or privilege like my mother was, and the affordable housing that sits right on top of this building, they really hit it on the head with that. And then when you look at this building, I think of the 7 the criteria that are listed in the ordinance for landmark designation. I believe this building meets at least 4 of those criteria. It's associated with a person who contributed to the social and cultural and economic development of Rogers Park, which was my mother, Ramona Rouse. That's not my words, it's the community's words. People knew and loved my mother, and she was not a political person. But also because this building, as her son is my first Black state senator from the far north side of Chicago, I'm able to be a state senator for this community and represent so many people who've never even had representation because, my mother was able to provide for me and ensure that I got an access to good education because of her success as a business owner in a space that was one of the only that she could afford as a single mom in the mid-1990s. And finally, I would say that this building also just has architectural significance. I've always known that this is a special building because of how it looks. I remember taking the trash out for my mom and going out in the back and always thinking it's so interesting that this is kind of like a hypotenuse or flat iron shaped building. But this is really an iconic building in the neighborhood. Everybody recognizes it when they get off the train. And when I say everybody, it's the full range of diversity of Rogers Park, which is why the community is special and why I'm honored to represent it in the Illinois Senate, because this is a building that has been a community space for people of all social and cultural and economic spectrums in the neighborhood. And therefore, I think that we have a huge opportunity to preserve and landmark this building so that it continue to be a space for those small business owners that may not be able to be located in Rogers Park otherwise. And also for those affordable housing residents that have called this home for a long time and don't want to leave Rogers Park. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share that with you.
Thank you. And you used to sit on that side of the table.
Oh, okay.
Well, I said you used to when you looked
That's
for
right.
DPD.
I should have also mentioned, I should say hello to some of my former colleagues. I was honored to be able to work at Department of Planning and Development 10 years ago. The deputy commissioner is kind of where I got my start. And being back here right now has been, I'm kind of geeking out about the architecture history of the city of Chicago. This is something that I'm interested in just beyond this building. I really love Chicago. I'm really patriotic about the built environment here. And this is an important part of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, before you move on,
Yes.
I have just a comment and then a question. Well, two comments. One, I want to commend the community who's done an incredible job, especially you, Kristen. Hi, nice to see you. It's really amazing what you're doing on behalf of this building. I want to clarify that our role today is not to make a decision. It is to listen to all public comments and then the staff will determine what the next steps are. But you're certainly being heard loud and clear today. I'm hoping that one of the two of you could speak just for a minute about the urgency of your recommendation for the landmarking process.
I mean, I do believe it is an urgent situation. Roman Susan has a lease that goes until the end of 2025, but the university has published that they are planning to demolish the space. And yeah, I guess when I was speaking with Ward from Preservation Chicago, he told me about the orange and red designation status and if it's possible to delay further any application, that would be the first step. Maybe, I don't know how it works, but
But we pointed out this wasn't an orange rated building, so
yeah.
there's no breaks here. There's no opportunity to have that 3 months of space at 90 days to landmark this. So the university could pull a demolition permit tomorrow and demolish the building the following week. So there was a sense of urgency to bring this before you.
Are there the other tenants still occupying the building, Kristen, as far as you know?
So the university did not allow anybody to renew their
Right.
residential leases. So tenants have been leaving based on that.
So is Roman Susan the last tenant on the ground floor?
Good questions. Thank you. Next, Atrium Homes.
Did you want any public comment?
We don't ask for public comment.
Just wanted to say we're in support of this, and it's wonderful to see a community come forward with such a landmark designation suggestion. Thank you.
Sorry.
One last just quick comment, just to the urgency question. I think that you're exactly right, Kristen. This building could be demolished, tomorrow, and there's been such a big outcry from the community to preserve it. I know that Alderwoman Maria Haddon was not able to be here today, but she's also been very supportive in these efforts. And so I just wanted to make sure, the elected officials, the community, the former residents, affordable housing residents, as well as the current remaining occupants really support preserving this building. And we have a bit of a structural glitch with the timing.
Thank you. The next one is Atrium Homes, 1374-80 and 1366-72, East Madison Park. The suggestor is Lawrence Converso.
Yeah.
Lawrence,
Commissioners, he also cannot be here today, but he definitely wants to come back when we can reconvene again at another meeting.
okay, thank you. The next one is All Saints, St. Anthony Catholic Church, 518 West 28th Place. Patrick Grossi from Preservation Chicago is the suggestor.
Commissioners Patrick Grossi could not be here with us today. But I'm the Richard H. House Executive Director of Preservation Chicago, Ward Miller, of course. This is an amazing church by Henry Schlacks. It was built in 1913. We've seen a number of these great buildings and houses of worship, and especially within the Catholic Church in the Archdiocese of Chicago. We've seen a number of these buildings close, these parishes consolidated. And these buildings sort of in the crosshairs, if you will, they're threatened with an uncertain future, if you will. And this is a success story, if you will. This just opened last Saturday as the Xilin, that's Xilin, St. Anthony Center. It will be a center serving the Bridgeport community. It's owned by a Chinese group. They are in favor of Chicago landmark designation of the building, and it's strictly the exterior of the building, commissioners, just so you know. Although they've done a fine job of restoring the interior, even though the Archdiocese took the art glass windows, the organ and the pews. They've done a fine job of restoring the architecture of the interior, cleaning the exterior. This was sort of a ruddy brown color due to 100 years of pollution plus, and it's been restored to a buff color. These are pictures from Saturday night, so you can see the glow of the building, and we're very proud to have worked with them over the last 2 years towards this outcome. You can see this mosaic, the life of St. Anthony, and there were 700 to 1,000 people that attended. A lot of people in the community will be there to support this. And I was hoping that a representative from ownership would be here today, but they couldn't make it. They will submit a letter of recommendation, and I believe, I don't want to speak for the Alderwoman, but I believe she's in support of this as well. So this is really a wonderful outcome for a former religious building that will now be a community center for the Bridgeport Chinatown area. So we're very happy to bring this before you today.
Thank you. The last item on the agenda is Arthur Dixon Transfer Company Building at 1319-47 South State Street, and Rebecca Glendinning is the suggestion.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Clendenin. I work for the FAME Center that is currently located on the north side of this building. We've been renting space from them for about 5 years. We're currently in agreement. We have a purchase agreement to buy this building, and we're scheduled to close tentatively on March 10th. So full disclosure, we're in the purchase process and we're running a campaign for that. So I'm here really at the behest of the residents of the South Loop, who during our community engagement meetings have asked me to come share the history that I uncovered in promoting this building and giving all of our tours of the space. We're trying to create a South Loop Center for the Arts. So many people have walked by this full block size industrial building without having any idea what's in it or knowing any of the history. It was built in 1900 by Arthur Dixon, who was an alderman of the city of Chicago. Both of his sons were also later aldermen. He was called the father of the city council for 20 years in the latter half of the 19th century. He was instrumental in the development of the Chicago Public Libraries and the Chicago Fire Department, served on a number of civic and corporate boards, including the World's Fair Board. So we have instructions for the World's Fair exhibitors to send their exhibits to the 1319 South State building. From there, they would be moved for the installation in the World's Fairgrounds. Arthur Dixon Transfer Company was the largest transfer company in the United States in its time, moving all the merchandise off the railways in the South Loop onto horse-drawn carts to distribute throughout the city of Chicago. It lasted until about the 1950s. His family told me they sold it, I think, somewhere between 1954 and 64. They couldn't remember specifically, and I couldn't find the sales deed. But what happened was, the rail lines kind of went into decline and people weren't shipping as much that way. So it became kind of an obsolete industry. But the building was built. He contracted Charles Palmer, who trained under John Van Ostel. I'm not an architect, so I'm leaning on your good graces and assuming you know more about this than I do. But as I understand it, John Van Ostel was famous for his contribution to the industrial Chicago style architecture. This is the tradition that Charles Palmer trained under. He also was contracted to work on the Palmer House under Potter Palmer, and was really known for his contribution to the utilities and the industrial development of architectural styles at the time. So I understand that he contributed the indoor hot water plumbing system for the Palmer House, as well as the marble stairways. Unfortunately, in 1911, the southern half of this structure burned down. It was a major municipal disaster. And Arthur Dixon contracted the rebuild by Halliburton Roche. So this middle building, as we call it, and this south building here are both Halliburton Roche buildings. The south side was recommissioned for rebuild again in 1920s. So you can see the beautiful brick corbelling on the outside and the steel grates on the windows. All of those remain intact. On the interior, there's really beautiful exposed timber arches and sunroof that runs the full length of this building from front to back, like where this door is all the way to the back. It has this really amazing old style mechanical wrenches to open the windows, which I love. It also has, you know, the original steel and timber beams and pillars running throughout the building. This was adapted for reuse by the Willow Creek Church, which is located out in South Barrington in 2018, but they did a really great job of kind of respecting the industrial and historical elements of the building that remain. So you have a lot of the exposed brick interiors still intact and visible. And in fact, what I was going to tell you, Dan, is I can't quite explain it, but on that north building that was what remains of the Charles Palmer contribution, there is an original fire hydrant and sidewalk on the interior in the basement, but it must precede the period where the streets were raised. And I can't really explain that because that must have happened prior to 1900. So I think he must have built this on the footprint of the timber warehouses that were located on the rail lines at the time. In any case, I think this is a really remarkable example of the rail industry landscape of the South Loop. And it precedes Motor Row and that industry that is just, you know, a block to the south and like 2 blocks, you know, to the west, right on State Street and right next to the elevated train line. So I think it is certainly worthy of our appreciation and hopefully worthy of our protection as well. I will say as an added note, you know, we're under contract to buy it. As owners, we absolutely support the, you know, making this a landmark. I haven't talked to the church. Again, I'm here because the residents asked me to come for this, and I did wait until we were under contract because I didn't want to undermine our good faith negotiations. But this building was marketed for vertical redevelopment. And this is really what has kind of motivated the residents to kind of push me to be here because this area has gentrified and densified significantly with a lot of vertical high-rise buildings. So they don't want to see that increased density. The building, as the South Loop neighbors tell me, is right square in the middle of the neighborhood, north to south, east to west, making it really an important location for the neighborhood's larger landscape.
Thank you. Thank you for your suggestions, all of them, and for taking the time to share your thoughts and information with us. All of the suggestions will now be given to Historic Preservation Division staff for further review. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you for attending. Lights on. Thank you.
There you go. There you go. He's in front of the bridge. Yeah, good done, good done.
Great job. Great job.
Well, thank you. All right.
Very nice to meet you. Thanks, buddy. Of course. Thank you. Sure, kid.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Of course. Likewise. I'm good. I got a new job now. Everyone in the my boss. What were you doing? I started my.
Yeah.
So,